My name is Letitia. I'm 31 years old, and for 5 years I lived with a narcissist who made me feel like nothing. This is my narcissist true story, my narcissist confession, and sometimes when I think about it, it feels like my life was a sad song written in bruises no one could see. I thought I was in love, but what I was really in was a trap, a toxic love wrapped in promises and betrayal. He told me I was special, that I was his only one, but his actions cut me down until I didn't even recognize myself anymore. The abuse didn't start with shouting. It started quietly, invisibly. He criticized me in ways that felt like jokes at first. "You'd be prettier if you lost a little weight. You're cute, but not really my type." Words that slipped under my skin and stayed there. I laughed them off, but inside, I felt smaller every time. That's how narcissist abuse works. It doesn't begin with obvious cruelty. It begins with whispers that erode your confidence little by little until there's nothing left. If I was happy, he called me fake. If I was sad, he said I was dramatic. If I stayed quiet, he accused me of sulking. No version of me was ever right. Soon, I learned to shrink, to make myself invisible, to live in silence just to avoid his disapproval. That's when the emotional abuse really began. The kind no one else sees, the kind that makes you doubt your own worth. The gaslighting came later, sharper, more deliberate. When I found messages on his phone, he told me I was paranoid. "Why do you always imagine things? You're sick." When I smelled perfume on his clothes, he laughed in my face. "That's yours. Don't you remember spraying it?" I started to question my own memory, my own senses. I began apologizing for things I hadn't done, begging him to forgive me for mistakes he had created. That's the manipulation of a narcissist. They rewrite your reality until you believe their lies more than your own truth. The humiliation was constant. In public, he made me the punchline. "Don't listen to her. She's always confused." Friends laughed, not realizing how deeply those words cut. Once, at a dinner with his family, he told them, "Letitia's lucky to have me. No one else would put up with her?" They laughed too, and I forced myself to smile while my heart shattered. That's what it means to be broken by a narcissist. Your pain becomes their entertainment. I stayed. I stayed longer than I should have, because I believed him when he said no one else would love me. "You're nothing without me," he whispered, and those words became chains around my soul. I believed that if I left, I would disappear, that without him, I would cease to exist. That's the invisible prison survivors know too well. Fear and shame that silence you, that convince you abuse is safer than freedom. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head. "You're worthless. You're too sensitive. You're nothing." Those words echo like a broken record, a song of suffering I didn't choose but couldn't escape. My narcissist relationship was never love. It was control, betrayal, humiliation. It was a slow death of everything I was, until I became a ghost inside my own life. He made me feel like nothing. And maybe the hardest part of this narcissist abuse story is that for so long, I believed I truly was nothing. The gaslighting became the air I breathed. At first, it was small things, easy to dismiss. He would say I'd forgotten conversations we'd had, or that I'd misunderstood his tone. "You always twist my words," he told me. And I believed him, because I wanted to believe we were okay. But soon it went deeper. He erased whole moments from my life. If I reminded him of a promise he broke, he would laugh in my face and say, "That never happened." His laughter made me feel crazy, like I was losing my grip on reality. That's how narcissist manipulation works. It takes your memories, your truth, and turns them into something you no longer trust. I remember one night clearly. I had been waiting for him to come home, and when he finally arrived, I smelled perfume on him, not mine. My heart dropped, but I asked softly, "Where were you?" He smirked and said, "You're imagining things again. You always do this, Letitia. You're so insecure." The cruelty wasn't only in the betrayal itself, it was in making me feel like I was insane for noticing. I stood there doubting my own senses, while he walked away like he had won a game. And in a way, he had. He had trained me to distrust myself. The humiliation followed me everywhere. Around friends, he constantly made jokes at my expense. "She's always confused. She's so emotional." People laughed, and I forced myself to laugh too, while inside, I was bleeding. Once, at a birthday party for a friend, he leaned over to someone and said, "She'd be nothing without me." They both laughed, and I felt my chest collapse. He wasn't just humiliating me. He was convincing everyone else of my worthlessness too. That's what makes narcissist abuse so isolating. It's not just between two people. He spreads it like poison until you feel trapped from every direction. I began to live in constant fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being unloved. I walked on eggshells, careful with every word, every gesture. If I was too quiet, he accused me of sulking. If I spoke up, he called me hysterical. There was no safe version of me. I felt like a prisoner in my own skin. That's the invisible prison survivors of narcissist relationships know too well. A prison with no walls, but one that locks you inside yourself. Sometimes he punished me with silence. Days would go by with him ignoring me completely. I would beg him to tell me what I had done wrong, but he just stared past me like I didn't exist. That silence crushed me more than any insult. It was like being erased. Then suddenly, he'd decide to forgive me, without ever telling me what the crime was. I lived for those moments, because the relief of being noticed again felt like love. That's the toxic cycle of abuse. Cruelty followed by false kindness. Enough to keep you hooked. The lies were endless. If I confronted him about where he had been, he always had an answer ready. I was with friends. I had to work late. And when I questioned too much, he snapped, "You're obsessed. You're paranoid." His ability to twist reality left me constantly questioning myself. And the worst part was, I started apologizing to him. Apologizing for doubting him. Apologizing for my insecurities. Apologizing for my pain. I was apologizing for the abuse he created. The control seeped into every part of my life. He decided how I should dress, how I should act, who I could talk to. If I wore something he didn't like, he'd sneer, "You look desperate." If I spoke too much around his friends, he whispered, "You embarrassed me." Soon, I stopped making choices altogether. I let him decide everything, because it was easier than fighting. That's what psychological abuse does. It breaks you until you surrender. I started losing pieces of myself. My laughter, my confidence, my dreams, they all disappeared. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were empty, her smile gone. I whispered to myself, "Who are you?" But the only voice that answered was his. His insults, his accusations, his lies. That's what it feels like to live with a narcissist. You stop hearing your own voice. The worst part was the way he convinced me that I was the problem. "You're too sensitive. You're too dramatic. No one else would ever put up with you." Those phrases became chains. They wrapped around me until I couldn't imagine a life outside of him. He didn't need to lock me in a room. He had already locked me in my own mind. That's why I stayed. Not because I loved him, but because I believed I couldn't survive without him. Even now, when I think back, I still hear those words. "You're nothing." They echo in the quiet moments, in the dark nights. They remind me of the years I lost, the parts of me I buried just to survive. And that's the cruelty of narcissist abuse. It doesn't end when the relationship ends. It lingers, like a scar you can't stop touching. He made me feel like nothing. And for too long, I believed I was nothing. The escalation of the abuse came slowly at first, and then all at once. By the time I realized how deep I was in, I felt like I had no way out. His insults became sharper, his humiliation more public, his betrayal more obvious. What had started as small criticisms turned into full attacks on who I was. He no longer needed to hide it behind jokes. He knew he had control. I remember one night at a dinner with friends. I had been telling a story, laughing nervously, just trying to feel normal. He interrupted me mid-sentence and said loudly, "Don't listen to her. She gets everything wrong. She's hopeless." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, my cheeks burning. But when I looked into his eyes, he wasn't laughing. He was watching me, savoring my humiliation. That was when I realized my pain was his entertainment. It didn't stop there. On social media, he posted pictures of us with captions that made it seem like we were perfect. Smiling, holding hands, pretending to be in love. But behind those images was silence, coldness, betrayal. That's the cruelty of a narcissist relationship. They create a mask for the world while destroying you in private. And you feel trapped, because no one believes what happens behind closed doors. The isolation became unbearable. He didn't forbid me directly from seeing friends or family. He didn't have to. Every time I wanted to go out, he guilted me. Why would you rather be with them than with me? They don't really care about you. Eventually, I stopped trying. I distanced myself from everyone until he was the only person in my world. That's how narcissist control works. It doesn't always come with locked doors. Sometimes it comes with whispered doubts that make you lock yourself away. He ruined special days deliberately. On my birthday, he disappeared for hours, returning late and drunk. When I asked where he had been, he smirked and said, "You don't deserve to celebrate. What would we be celebrating anyway? You're nothing." That sentence cut through me more than any knife could. Birthdays are supposed to be moments of love, of recognition. But for me, they became a reminder that I wasn't worth remembering. Holidays were no better. On Christmas, when I had decorated the house and prepared dinner, he looked at everything and sneered, "You try too hard. Nobody cares." He spent the evening on his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. That night, I sat in the kitchen alone, staring at the untouched food, wondering why I kept hoping things would be different. That's the heartbreak of toxic love. Hope keeps you chained even when everything inside you is breaking. The betrayals grew more obvious, but so did his denial. Once I found a necklace in his jacket pocket, not mine. My heart raced as I asked him about it. He laughed in my face. "You're pathetic, always looking for drama. Maybe you put it there yourself." I almost believed him. That's the power of gaslighting. Even when the evidence is right in front of you, you doubt your own reality. The insults became crueler. "You're boring. You're worthless. No one would ever want you." He said them casually, as if he were describing the weather. And the worst part is, I started to believe them. They became part of me, part of how I saw myself. I didn't need him to insult me anymore. I did it for him. That's the deepest wound of psychological abuse. You carry the abuser's voice inside you, long after he's gone. The humiliation reached a peak during a party he insisted we attend. I had dressed up, done my hair, tried to feel beautiful. As soon as we arrived, he leaned toward a friend and said, "She tries, but she'll never pull it off." They laughed. I felt my face burn, my stomach turn, but I smiled anyway. I always smiled, pretending everything was fine while inside, I was breaking. That's what it means to be trapped by a narcissist. You learn to mask your suffering because no one else sees the truth. At home, he didn't need to scream. His silence was worse. He would lie on the couch, scrolling through his phone, ignoring me completely. I would sit beside him, desperate for attention, desperate for some sign of love. Hours passed, and he never looked up. That silence was crushing. It told me louder than words that I didn't matter, that I was nothing. The control extended even to my dreams. When I talked about wanting to start a new project, he scoffed, "You'll fail, just like everything else." When I mentioned going back to school, he smirked, "You don't have the brains for that." He destroyed every spark of ambition before it could light. And slowly, I stopped dreaming altogether. Looking back, I see how systematic it all was. The lies, the manipulation, the humiliation, the isolation, it was all part of the same design. He wanted me small. He wanted me broken. He wanted me to believe I was nothing, because that gave him all the power. And he succeeded. I stayed. I stayed even when my heart screamed to leave. I stayed because I believed him when he said no one else would ever love me. I stayed because I was afraid of being alone. I stayed because shame told me I didn't deserve better. That's the invisible prison of a narcissist relationship. You don't stay because you love them. You stay because they convince you there is no world outside of them. He made me feel like nothing. And by then, I was nothing but a shadow of who I used to be. The worst part of being trapped in a narcissist relationship is the invisible prison you build around yourself. On the outside, there are no bars, no chains. But inside, fear and shame become your jailers. I stayed with him, not because I didn't know he was destroying me, but because I believed I didn't deserve anything better. He convinced me that his cruelty was love, that his betrayal was my fault, that his humiliation was the price I had to pay for companionship. And I believed him. Fear was everywhere. Fear of being alone. Fear of being unloved forever. Fear of starting over and failing. He used those fears like weapons. Whenever I thought about leaving, he whispered, "No one else will want you. You'll come crawling back." Sometimes he didn't even need words. Just a look, a smirk, and I crumbled. That's the control of a narcissist. They don't always need to raise their voice to own you. Shame was the second chain. I was ashamed of staying, ashamed of allowing him to break me, ashamed of becoming a woman I didn't recognize. How could I tell my friends, my family, what was happening? To them, he looked charming, funny, successful. They saw the pictures we posted, the smiles I forced, the life we pretended to have. No one saw the nights of silence, the cruel words, the betrayals. And so I stayed in silence too. Shame kept me quiet. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all my life would ever be. I imagined leaving, but the thought filled me with dread. Where would I go? Who would believe me? Who would want me? He had drained me so completely that I no longer believed in my own strength. That's the poison of narcissist abuse. It doesn't just break your heart, it steals your belief in yourself. Sometimes he pretended to change, just enough to keep me from walking away. After days of silence or cruel insults, he would suddenly become affectionate. He'd kiss me, hold me, whisper, "I love you. I can't live without you." And my heart, desperate for scraps of love, would believe him again. I wanted so badly to believe that the man who hurt me could also heal me. That's the twisted hope survivors cling to, the belief that the cycle will break if they just hold on long enough. But the cycle never broke. The cruelty always came back, sharper than before. On one of my darkest nights, after a long fight where he called me worthless and pathetic, I remember begging him, "Please, just tell me one good thing about me." He looked at me with cold eyes and said, "There isn't one." I felt my soul collapse. In that moment, I wasn't even angry. I was numb. He had hollowed me out so much that I couldn't even feel rage anymore. Isolation became complete. I no longer spoke to my closest friends. I stopped visiting family. Whenever they reached out, I made excuses. "I'm busy. I'm tired." The truth was, I was ashamed for them to see how broken I was. And deep down, I was afraid he was right, that if they saw me, they wouldn't want me either. The narcissist doesn't need to lock you away. They just convince you that you don't belong anywhere else. There were times I thought about running away in the middle of the night. I pictured myself packing a bag, walking out the door, disappearing. But then his words replayed in my head. "You're nothing without me." Those words wrapped around me like chains. Even when he wasn't in the room, he was still inside my mind. That's the invisible cage. You don't even need his presence to feel trapped. Looking back now, I can see how completely he shaped me into what he wanted. He wanted me small. He wanted me silent. He wanted me broken. And he succeeded. By then, I wasn't living anymore. I was surviving. My days were just about getting through without provoking him. My nights about waiting for the storm to pass. That's what it means to be trapped by a narcissist. Your entire existence becomes about managing their moods, while your own life fades into nothing. He made me feel like nothing. And the truth is, I stayed because I believed him. I stayed because the fear and shame felt heavier than the thought of freedom. I stayed because hope was twisted into chains. I stayed because I didn't think I deserved to leave. And that's the cruelest part of this narcissist abuse story. I didn't just lose him. I lost myself. The damage didn't stop when the relationship ended. In many ways, it only began there. People think leaving a narcissist is the end of the nightmare. But for me, it was the beginning of living with the scars. His voice followed me long after he was gone. In the quiet moments, in the middle of the night, when I looked at myself in the mirror, it was still his words I heard. You're worthless. You're nothing. No one will ever love you. I carried that soundtrack into every part of my life. At work, I doubted myself constantly, terrified of making mistakes. Even when I succeeded, I felt like a fraud. His voice whispered, "You don't deserve this." In friendships, I pulled away, afraid they would see how broken I was. I didn't know how to accept kindness anymore. Compliments felt like lies, affection felt like traps. That's what psychological abuse does. It rewires your brain until even love feels dangerous. Dating after him was almost impossible. If someone showed me interest, I felt suspicious. If someone was too kind, I waited for the cruelty I knew would come. I didn't believe in real love anymore. I believed only in cycles. Kindness followed by punishment, affection followed by betrayal. That was the rhythm he taught me, the rhythm of toxic love. And even when he was no longer there to enforce it, I kept dancing to it. The trauma seeped into my body. I couldn't sleep. My chest was always tight. I startled at sudden noises, convinced they were warnings of an attack. My hair fell out in clumps. I lost weight I didn't mean to lose. Emotional abuse isn't just invisible. It's physical. The stress becomes sickness. The silence becomes exhaustion. The fear becomes part of your skin. I tried to explain it to others, but the words never seemed enough. He never hit you, some people said, as if that meant it wasn't real. But the truth is, sometimes words cut deeper than fists. His cruelty left scars on my mind that I still trace every day. I lived in a gaslighting story so long that I stopped trusting my own reality. And even now, sometimes I wonder if the memories are true, or if I'm still trapped in his version of them. Shame became my shadow. I blamed myself for everything. For staying, for believing him, for letting him take so much of me. I replayed every moment, asking myself if I could have done something differently. Maybe if I had been stronger. Maybe if I had loved him more. Maybe if I had kept quiet. Maybe then he wouldn't have destroyed me. That's the lie survivors of narcissist abuse carry. The belief that the destruction was their fault. Even when he was gone, I carried his control. I dressed in clothes I thought he would approve of. I measured my words as if he were still listening. I avoided people he disliked, even though he wasn't around anymore to care. He didn't need to be there. His rules lived inside me. That's the invisible prison no one talks about. You leave, but the chains stay. There was one moment when I realized how deep the damage went. A friend hugged me, and instead of feeling comfort, I flinched. My body wasn't used to kindness anymore. It didn't know what to do with warmth. I had been trained to expect cruelty, so even love felt like danger. I pulled away, embarrassed, ashamed. Later, I cried, not just because of what he had done to me, but because of what I had lost, the ability to feel safe in love. The worst part was realizing how much I had internalized his voice. It wasn't just something I remembered. It was something I repeated to myself. When I made a mistake, I told myself, "You're stupid." When I looked in the mirror, I whispered, "You're not enough." I became my own abuser, carrying on his work long after he had left. That's the lasting wound of narcissist control. You don't need him to keep destroying you. You do it to yourself. But there's also something else, a tiny spark that refused to die. Even in the darkest nights when I believed I was nothing, a small voice inside me whispered, "You're still here." I don't know where that voice came from, but it kept me alive. It reminded me that even broken, even humiliated, even erased, I was still breathing. And maybe that meant something. I wish I could say I was healed, that I left him behind completely, that his words no longer haunt me. But that wouldn't be the truth. The truth is, I am still learning how to silence his ghost. I am still learning how to hear my own voice again. I am still learning how to believe that I am more than nothing. He made me feel like nothing. But the fact that I am telling this story means he didn't succeed completely. There is something haunting about surviving a narcissist relationship. People think the hardest part is leaving. But for me, the hardest part has been learning to live afterward. The silence after him was almost as loud as his presence. I would sit in my apartment, staring at the walls, expecting his voice to break through, expecting his insults to rain down. But the silence was mine, and yet it didn't feel safe. It felt heavy, filled with echoes of everything he had said. I carried his words everywhere. In the supermarket line, I would hear him whisper, "You're pathetic." At work, when I stumbled, I heard, "You'll never succeed." When I looked in the mirror, it was his smirk that stared back at me, not my own reflection. He was gone, but he was still there. That's the truth survivors rarely say out loud. The abuser doesn't need to stay in your life to stay inside your mind. Some nights, I dreamed of him, not as a lover, but as a shadow, looming, reminding me that I was nothing. I woke up sweating, shaking, gasping for air, and in those moments, I realized that healing from narcissist abuse isn't just emotional, it's physical. The body remembers what the heart tries to forget. My chest still tightens, my hands still tremble, my voice still falters. Trauma doesn't just leave, it lingers, demanding to be carried. I think about the woman I used to be, before him. I was never perfect, but I was alive. I laughed freely. I dreamed loudly. I believed in love. He took that from me, piece by piece, until I became a ghost inside my own skin. He didn't just break my heart. He broke my belief that I mattered. That's why I stayed so long, because he convinced me I was nothing, and nothing doesn't fight to be free. Nothing just survives. But even nothing can whisper. And in the quietest moments when his voice was loudest, I started to hear my own. It wasn't strong. It wasn't confident. But it was mine. A fragile whisper that said, "You deserve more. You are still here." Healing is not a straight line. Some days I feel stronger. Other days I crumble. I avoid places we used to go, songs we used to play, words he used to use. Sometimes I still flinch when someone raises their voice. Sometimes I still silence myself in conversations, afraid of saying the wrong thing. His control is gone, but the habits remain. That's the invisible prison survivors carry long after escape. I don't want to romanticize survival. It's not glamorous. It's not triumphant. It's raw, messy, painful. It's waking up and forcing yourself to believe you're more than the words that destroyed you. It's looking in the mirror and searching for the woman you used to be, even when you can't find her. It's choosing, over and over again, to keep going, even when every part of you still aches. He made me feel like nothing. And sometimes I still feel like nothing. But the fact that I can say those words out loud means something. It means his silence didn't erase me. It means his cruelty didn't destroy me completely. It means that somewhere, inside all the pain, I am still alive. And maybe being alive is the beginning of being more than nothing.